Will, did you try to diagram this one?
I do not.
Anyone try to diagram?
No.
Okay, let's try to do it intuitively. Let's do that. If we,
Are you supposed to do these questions intuitively?
I would try to do it intuitively and then only diagram if I was like, could not get my mind wrapped around it. Because at the end of the day, although intuition takes a little longer to get your mind wrapped around it, because you can't just like draw everything, right? Like you have to think like, oh, what's this actually saying? It ends up being faster because once you get it, like your mind is just matching it to a mental map that you understand,
Right.
rather than like something you've written down.
Right. That makes sense. I guess, so if I'm just, I feel bad because the video's on, but, so I've just had to, these are like the questions I have the most trouble with. Should I
Parallel
just-
reasoning.
Yeah, should I just wait till, should I skip these on the test? Instead
Don't
of,
skip them if they're early in the test. Skip them if they're on the last 2 pages.
like, last two pages? Okay, cool.
Yeah, because like it's easy enough to be like, oh, this is parallel reasoning, you know right away.
This isn't gonna be.
Just skip it, and then if you have time, you're right there, so you can go right back to it, right?
Okay.
If it's earlier in the test, it tends to be easy. So like a lot of times people are like, oh, parallel reasoning. It's like, well, it's an easy parallel reasoning, so you might as well do it because you'll just get it right and then move on.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for this one, if concrete, good luck, Cole. If concrete is poured while the ground is wet. Are we okay with this so far? I'm trying to visualize it because it's a lot easier to remember a picture than it is words.
Yeah.
So if we pour the concrete while the ground is wet, that doesn't sound like a good idea. It will not form a solid foundation. Oh, yeah. If the concrete does not form a solid foundation, if that happens, it will either settle unevenly or crack. This is all making sense, and it sounds awful, right? It's either going to be like, bleh, or it's going to crack.
Right.
Okay? So, if the concrete settles evenly, either it was poured while the ground was dry, that makes sense, none of this ever happened, or it will crack, because it was the other option.
Right.
How does this sound?
Right.
So in my mind, the way I'm thinking about this is, if you do something, then this other negative thing will happen, and if this negative thing happens, then you'll have two other negative one or the other of these two negative outcomes, right?
Right.
So then the conclusion says, well, if one of those negative outcomes what? Doesn't happen.
Right.
Then it must be the case that what?
That the first thing didn't happen.
The very first thing didn't happen, which would have triggered this whole like chain of events.
Right.
Or the second negative thing is going to happen.
Gotcha.
Because if the first thing did happen and one of the negative outcomes didn't happen, then the other negative outcome has to happen, right?
Yeah.
So this argument actually seems valid, right? You're going to have a chain of events. If one of the negative outcomes didn't happen, then either the other one's going to happen or the first initial chain never got triggered.
Okay, that works.
Sound good? So
you.
it takes a little more time, sometimes intuitively get our minds wrapped around it, but then as we go through the answer choices, we can see if it fits right away and then be like confident because we understand it intuitively, you know?
Yeah.
So what answers were you debating?
I went with C.
Okay. So let's take a look at C. The photograph will either be blurred or dark if the camera is not working properly. That sounds okay because we have the two negative outcomes, right?
Right.
This photograph is not blurred. I'm
Right.
stopping right there. Why am I stopping right there?
Well, if it's not blurred,
Are you
that's
thinking?
not that doesn't necessarily mean that the camera's working properly. It's
So
not working properly.
what answer choice C says is it says if the camera is not working properly, then you're going to have these two negative outcomes, right?
Right.
That's sort of like the original. The original had this like, we had if the concrete is wet, then it won't form a solid foundation, right? And if it doesn't form a solid foundation, then it will either crack or what was the other thing? Oh, it would be uneven, right? It's not even. Sound good?
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, so if it doesn't crack, or what was
It
it?
doesn't settle evenly. If it settles evenly.
Oh, if it settles evenly. Okay, so if it's not that thing, then it's either gonna crack or it was never gonna be W. It wasn't wet, right? Are we okay with that? I'm kind of going off of memory there. It was either poured while the ground was dry, not wet, or it will crack. Yeah, okay. Answer choice C says the photograph will either be blurred or dark if the camera is not working properly. I feel like that's this part of the argument right here, right? If it's not working properly, then it's going to be blurred or dark.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. They reordered the argument, but that doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The next sentence, though, says, this photograph is not blurred, comma, so. So what's going to come after that so? What always comes after so?
The conclusion.
The conclusion, which means you just read what? A premise. In our original argument, did we ever have a straight up, this is the case. The ground is dry. The ground is wet.
No.
No. All we had was if-then statements.
So
If.
that's a structural issue.
That's a structural issue right there. I'm like, bam,
Yeah.
this answer
Okay.
choice is wrong. I'm not going to read any further because a premise was given to me that was like a fact as opposed to a conditional statement.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sound good?
Yes.
So we're done with that one. Let's go back to A. The film will not be properly exposed if the camera is not working properly. Okay. So if you have a problem, then it won't be properly exposed. If the film is not properly exposed, well, this is good. We're continuing the chain, right?
Right.
Then the photograph will either be blurred or dark. Okay, we'll have these two negative outcomes. So if the photograph is not blurred, if it's not one of the negative outcomes, right, then either the camera is working properly, we didn't have the initial problem, or the photograph will be dark.
Right.
The other negative outcome.
I see that.
That's
helpful.
it. Cool.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions on this one? No? Okay.